Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be in front of you and really present my thoughts on the way finance, technology, and the role of communication is changing and how it is bringing the emergence of finance as a value function. My name is Aman Gupta, and I'm the managing partner of SPAG, one of the leading marketing communication firm which works across all the key Southeast Asian market. If we just look at the complex world of the business today, the way it has emerged, there are three factors which are sort of bringing in the key changes, the way the overarching business is functioning here. The one, the finance has evolved and the ecosystem in which it operates is continuing to change. And because of the same, the financial communication is becoming very, very important. As per the latest report in Forbes, technology is becoming one of the key drivers to bring this change. The three main changes which it is bringing in, the first is creating a level of new visibility and increasing the ability to provide the kind of insights which were not available to different stakeholders till now. These insights are not just valuable, but they are also important to take key decisions, whether it is in terms of your business, whether it's in terms of your policy, or whether it's in terms of how we as a world are operating. The second key driver or the change which the technology is bringing in, it's adding automation to eliminate work or make our task easier. If we just look at a decade back, it used to be a huge task for us to do any kind of a financial transaction, moving the money from one place to another, or just moving the money from one individual to another. In the recent times, we have seen that how technology and the power of mobile has helped us to become much more empowered, much more self-sufficient. And the overarching way the finance is being dealt is becoming much, much more easier. And that's something which is being even undertaken by the large financial institutions. Besides that, it's powering the overarching aspect of financial transactions per se. It's helping the trade to move from one place to another much more faster. It's allowing us to have the kind of the visibility which was not available till now. And that visibility is helping to make finance as one of the core areas and really bringing it at the center of it. The next thing which is really sort of happening here is that it's bringing in a kind of a behavioral change that is leading to our review of how our relationships with different stakeholders are, and it's highlighting the importance of the finance and the technology which it is. It's going beyond the relationship which used to exist just as a debtors and creditors. This overarching thing of therefore looking at technology merged along with the behavioral sciences and the stakeholder relationships is bringing the kind of an impact which we have not seen in the past. And therefore, with this kind of an impact, it becomes almost imperative that we as the practitioners of finance understand that how do we need to communicate to our different stakeholders, ensure that they are informed, they're empowered, and they're able to understand the different drivers, the way the finance is going to run the business in the coming years. One of the key things which is happening, and as we talked about, is the technology. Financial technology has changed the way people looked at the banking of finance as a whole. So this is something which we're looking at even at an individual level, not just at an organization level. Be it our day-to-day banking, our business or investment, financial technology has eased the access and making the things easy and convenient for all of us. And as we know that if the larger population starts to get empowered and get an easier access to, it will have its snowball impact on the organization per se. So therefore, as a finance people, we are just not responding to, or we are just not talking to a select set of people who we used to maybe in the past. We now need to talk to billions of the people who are on a day-to-day basis, on day-to-day base is getting much more engaged in this particular ecosystem. Keeping in mind that the smartphones are now almost an essentiality, and keeping in mind that more than 6 billion people globally are using these smartphones, the technology is in our hand. And with one of the most advanced rate of internet population as 59.5% of global population, it becomes very, very important for us to understand that how this technology will really change the way finances. So it's not just about the fact that how the finance is getting transacted, but it's also about the way the technology is defining the financial ecosystem. From having just the kind of currencies as we used to know, we have the new ways of the way the financial transactions are happening, whether it is cryptocurrencies, whether it is NFTs, whether it is just the ability of organizations to raise the finance through different new technologies or different new tools. It's changed the overarching ecosystem. And when such an ecosystem change is happening, and we need to ensure that we are able to make people understand how this change will bring in a difference in their life, communication becomes, and it becomes kind of as the center of the financial ecosystem. There's also a growing dependence of the finance and technology in terms of value addition with digital customer engagement, delivering more positive results. And I think that is something which would allow us to make finance much more democratized. But for that also to happen, it's very important for us to be at the forefront of it. The overarching open banking ecosystem, looking at a digitally native multi-channel banking solutions, or delivering value, whether it is at the front end or at the back end, is something which will bring in the kind of financial inclusion which has not been seen till now. And that financial inclusion, both at an individual level or at an organizational level, will bring in the finance at the core of the way any business is being run. There are things that not the way it used to be seen by the people, but that's the way that people will be seeing the finance, using technology at the base of it. Now, looking at the finance going from just the transactional part of it, one of the key conversation which is happening is that finance is not just working in isolation. It has not just its engagement, but also it has its responsibility to look at other silos in which the business or the trade happens. In the recent past, we have seen that how finance and the banking ecosystem is being urged to really look at the environmental risk, the sustainability aspect of it, as well as the social impact which is coming in. In the just few months back, as a part of the larger conversation which was happening, one of my very dear friends talked to me about the fact that how the environmental risk is becoming one of the cornerstone for the banking or the financial ecosystem to look at how they will be really looking at funding or providing the kind of a rate of interest through which the people can raise debt or can raise funds. And that was something which, in a way, is the direction which the overall ecosystem is taking. There are several domains through which we can see finance. I talked about sustainability, environment, energy, but also if we just look at the COP26 which just got over, there are more than 137 countries which pledged to become a net zero carbon emission by 2050. This means a significant investment and a significant increment in investment towards environment, energy, and sustainability. And this kind of a larger global shift is something which will bring in the way finance and the practitioner of finance has to look at the world in a much more broader sense, and also how they can communicate about it. And as you can sort of see, therefore, communication is becoming one of the cornerstone for the people in the finance. And that's something which I'll come up in my coming slide, that how we just don't need CFOs. We need CFOs to also to be the chief communication officer. Now let's look at the finance, the way it is innovating in itself. We are talking about a carbon credit restructuring happening. And, for example, if you just look at in the Southeast Asia, Singapore has its own global carbon exchange. And that is something which people are looking at, that it's not just about the transaction which is happening in the monetary term, but it is also happening from the way its impact on the environment can be. If we look at the other areas of environment, we are talking about catalyzing green hydrogen. We are looking at transitioning to a low carbon hydrogen economy, which is becoming very, very crucial for addressing concerns about climate change, reducing emissions, and accelerating decarbonization efforts. Relying this, as we know, about 32 countries in the European Union have released national strategies, roadmaps aimed at increasing hydrogen production and use. When such kind of policy decisions are taken, what it really means is there has to be a huge investment, whether it is from a public sector or from a private sector. And what comes at the core of it is the finance and the role of the people, which are behind the overarching financial ecosystem. This also is leading to the way the debt is getting restructured. as we know, as we work across a global economy, the debt is also moving and becoming a kind of a global ecosystem. We can look at minimizing the debt and the cost of the debt through both emerging it from the different economies or different markets, which is giving you a different rates. But also what it is doing is it's minimizing the cost of the debt through sustainable and long-term relationships. Companies are investing a lot of money to work with consultants to find innovative ways of financing without putting too much pressure on debtors. And that's something which is looking at how you need to operate, not just from a one geography, but you need to be really operating from a global perspective per se. And that leads to the next point, which is in terms of how does the cross-border trade, which is focusing on manufacturing units, tying in with market dynamics, and looking at both bilateral and multiple trade agreements. This overarching complex ecosystem is something which would be at the core of the way finance is being dealt with, and specifically the role of the CFOs continues to change. And that change looked at how you're engaging with your different stakeholders, and within that, ensuring that you are providing the right information at the right time and in the right manner. And thus comes the key pillar of how the financial communication needs to become a part of the role of a finance head. Therefore, if we look at what we have now in the next slide, is the new financial public relations model. What it talks about is the fact that there is a larger scrutiny when it comes to any kind of a financial transaction which is happening. Today, of all, every audience has something to say, whether it is public opinion, whether it's employee feedback, or whether it's an investor's insight. There's a lot of scrutiny, and one has to be cognizant that we need to sort of cater to everyone. And that cannot happen if we do not really have a structured communication in place. Communication is now beyond just the C-suite. It is sort of something which is at multiple layers. As I just sort of said, it's about engaging with your employees, you're engaging with your investor, you're engaging with the public, and as well as you're engaging with your businesses across different borders, across different policymakers. And therefore, how do you cater to the needs of the information to everyone becomes one of the key things which the finance ecosystem has to look at. And you have to sort of communicate not just at one level, but at all the levels. One of the key things which we have seen in the post-COVID era is that we just don't need to talk about everything from the data. We do also need to build a narrative around it. And that has been one of the biggest disruptors in the way the finance is being seen. Because as we sort of look at it, not everybody would understand the finance the way our finance practitioners will be, but we do need to engage and inform the other stakeholders. And that is where the packaging of the data in the form of the story starts to come in. We also need to not just talk about what we are doing, but we also need to talk about why it is relevant to each of these stakeholders, why they need to understand the importance of what is happening. And this is something, therefore, goes beyond just running the business. And we talk about, therefore, the third bottom line as a part of the larger annual report, wherein building the stakeholder capital by tapping into the larger purpose-driven societal issues becomes a very, very important thing. Something which I touched upon my previous slide, societal issues such as climate change, looking at how financial communication can bring in the kind of a change which is required there. And this is something, therefore, not just about profit and loss. It's about the kind of an impact which the businesses is making in the community in which they operate. And this, therefore, leads to much more stronger brand building, builds more empathy of the stakeholders with the business. And that is one of the key elements of the success as we have recognized in the recent times. And therefore, as we sort of, as I was talking about, just a few minutes back, the time has come for CFOs to just not remain the CFOs. They do need to look at also playing the role of being a chief communication officer. The key things, one, that there is a need to build trust, and that trust among stakeholders can only happen if there is a transparency in the way we are communicating. There is a certain level of frequency with which we are providing and updating our stakeholders on the information which is required, and that information has to be factually correct. It needs to be relevant and packaged in a way people are able to understand. And people are able to get the notifications in the manner they require. These all aspects are now becoming a part of the role which the CFOs needs to play. Building this kind of a trust and equity and cutting across the key communication management systems can bring in the kind of a transparency that can help business not just grow, but thrive in the coming times. This is something which therefore allows us to sort of look at how the businesses needs to therefore empower their CFOs to have and work very, very closely from a communication perspective. Besides that, and what we have now on the next slide is how the role of communication is building into engaging different stakeholders. One, it allows the tracking of stakeholder by mapping the evolving audience. We are able to look at the kind of conversations which are happening across different stakeholders and ability for us to communicate properly. We are able to decode complex data-driven jargon to communicate effectively in the manner which our audiences will be able to not just understand, but also appreciate. We do need to look at beyond traditional financing and update our stakeholders as per the interest and as per the frequency they are looking for. And finally, we do need to look at sustaining our social contract by ensuring that our communication flow and the way the business is being run goes beyond profit and loss. It's something which looks at beyond, about the purpose of the organization and looking at the role which we can play in the community in which we are operating. Therefore, just coming to the end of my conversation, there are a couple of things which any CFO needs to sort of understand. And as it sort of navigates the current financial ecosystem, which is being driven by technology and other factors. One is agility. The CFO needs to be agile enough to understand how and when to communicate. It also needs to understand that you have to work at different levels and not just have a kind of a linear conversation happening with one group of stakeholders. So that kind of an agility to change becomes very, very important. The second is the speed. It has to be something at the way currently the information flow happens. In most of the cases, the information flow is happening specifically in the real world time, looking at the way the digital ecosystem is informing our stakeholders. So the speed becomes very, very important. Experience of understanding the stakeholders and their need of information is the third pillar with which our CFO needs to sort of work. They need to package it in a way where people are able to understand what they are doing and have the ability to be flexible enough to mold the information accordingly. And finally, something which I said earlier, trust is something which we need to build. The trust is something, one of the cornerstone of any business. And the CFOs have a huge role to play in that. With that, I would like to sort of end my talk with saying that CFOs have a huge role in building the businesses, but besides understanding the finance part of it, they do need to understand the fact that how technology is bringing the change in the financial ecosystem and why this is such an important aspect of communicating what you're doing to your different stakeholders, because that will not just help make the business grow, but it is also something which is the need of the hour, because businesses, economies, and trade are now engaging with different stakeholders at different levels across different time zones. And if you communicate well, the businesses and the trade and economy will continue to grow and sustain and scale. With that, I would like to again thank the organization and all of your audience for listening into to me. Feel free to reach out if you have any particular questions or if you'd like me to provide any detail and further information or any other thing which I touched upon today. Thank you.